Hello, and welcome to my behind the scenes look at how I wrote my next book. I am so excited to share this with you because writing is a super private and personal process, or at least it is for me. And I don't really share much about how that process really works and how it goes. And I love it. Like, writing is one of my absolutely most favorite things to do. And I get a lot of questions about it. I get a lot of questions about, how did you know how to write a book? How did you write the book? How did you publish the book? And so I wanted to bring you all into that process with me and share how I wrote my next book, because the pre-sale of that book is happening less than 1 week from today. If you are listening to this on the release date of the podcast, the pre-sale happens starting on May 2nd, Tuesday, May 2nd. And it's going to be like a super fun blitz throughout the entire month of May with a bunch of freebies. And I'll talk about that at the end, but there's going to be some really good things if you buy the book in the month of May during that pre-sale, not just for you, but for the greater good and empowering young women as well. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk you through how I wrote this book. But before we get there, I'm really excited about this. I want to reveal the title to you. I have been talking about this book for over a year. I've been writing it for over a year. I've been talking about it, kind of giving little hints here and there, maybe sharing a story or a realization that I had, but I haven't actually publicly told the title to anyone. And so here it is. The title of my next book is Grounded Wildness. Grounded Wildness. And the subtitle is Break Free from Performing Your Life and Start Living It. Now, this book, it dives into everything on a deep way. So if my first book, An Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules, was really looking at that overdoing and productivity and achievement and how we tie that connect back to our worth and how to connect to ourselves separate from that, this looks at all the rules that you have been handed. So yes, the perfectionism and productivity and overdoing and overachieving, but not just that. Like, I realized that after I wrote that book, that was just level one. That was level one of a new freedom that I was about to feel, a level one of some really deep realizations that I have gone through over the last few years. And these other levels are related to my body and the expectations that we get about what our bodies are supposed to look like as women and how I'm supposed to show up in dating relationships and proving myself there because I didn't think my body was good enough. But not just that either, about using my voice and how I overfiltered and overthought using my voice in my job as an adult, and how I have broken through those rules to come back to that true inner voice, that true inner self, that freedom, that deep inner freedom that is inside all of us, that is still alive inside of you as well. And that's the crux of Grounded Wildness. That title came from this feeling that I had once I started to break through these rules of like, oh, I am now living in grounded wildness. It's a totally different feeling than I had at other parts of my adult life. So this book is part self-help, part memoir. It weaves in my personal stories, but then it also turns it back over to you, because this book isn't about me. It's about you rediscovering your story and your deep inner freedom. And I use those stories to illustrate, but also for you to see your own truth, because that's what I want for you to see, you to see your own truth and feel that freedom. So that is the title, Grounded Wildness. Break free from performing your life and start living it. And now it's going to be a whole lot easier to talk about the book now that I can just start calling it Grounded Wildness, Grounded Wildness. And I'm not going to tell you any more about the book right now, but I will be sharing more in future podcast episodes. And actually, the next one in 2 weeks, I'm just going to straight up read the introduction so that you can get a really good idea of what this book is all about. So that's part one, the big reveal of the title of Grounded Wildness of my next book. Now, let's dive into how I wrote it. And before I wanted to get into any of the details of how I did it, I want to point out a couple of things. First, this is how I wrote the book. There are a million different ways to write a book. And I know this to be true because I've always, even before I ever thought I would be an author, I have always loved to listen to other authors and writers. So I have heard, dozens of writers. So from Colson Whitehead to Elizabeth Gilbert to Nicole Krauss to Ann Patchett to Terry McMillan to Jacqueline Michard. So many. I've gone to events in Barnes and Noble and Talking Volumes in Minnesota, and even my dorm in college. I lived in this really amazing dorm where speakers would come and so Terry McMillan, who wrote How Stella Got Her Groove Back, and Jacqueline Michard, who wrote The Deep End of the Ocean, literally sat in the common room of my dorm, and we got to have this group conversation with them. So in short, I've heard a lot of different authors talk about their writing process, and it's all different. Every single person does it differently. So I know there's no one right way to do this, which I think is true with a lot of things in life. So I wanted to point that out before I shared anything. This is not an instruction guide. This just happens to be how I wrote the book. Second, I get a lot of questions around well, how did you know how to write a book? Did you take a class on how to write a book? And I did take some community ed writing classes on creative writing, and I took a class on writing op-eds. And I also thought for a while that I wanted to be a children's book author. So I took I think just one class on writing rhyming children's books. Yes, rhyming children's books. So I have several drafts of writing rhyming children's books that have not been published. We'll see whatever happens with that, but they're there. They're out there. And we'll see what happens on that side. But I've taken a few classes, but the short answer is did I take a class on how to write a book? No, I definitely did not take a class on how to write a book. Instead, I learned how to write a book by writing a book. And in my first book, An Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules, it was really interesting to see as I went through the whole first draft of that book and then went back to the beginning and read it again from start to finish. My writing got so much better as I wrote the book. The first couple of chapters were not good. They were not good. And they really read more like blog posts, which made sense because up until that point, that's mostly what I'd written was blog posts. But then as it got in, I got more into writing, what does it mean to write chapters? How do you connect them together? And so truly, I learned how to write a book by writing a book. So that means that you can also learn what to do, how to do something by actually doing it. And so this was my process for writing the book. And this second book, Grounded Wildness, had a pretty similar process to An Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules. So pretty similar in both of them. And I'm going to lay this out in kind of a process-oriented way because I need to structure it in some way. And there was structure to it, absolutely. And there was also magic. So I might have outlined, I'll talk through my organization, and also things came out when I was writing that I never would have expected. I literally had 45,000 words of notes, 45,000 words of notes, which is about the same length as the entire book. And the word shame only came up once or twice in all of those 45,000 words. And as I was starting the first draft, I was like, shame's coming up a lot here. What's going on there? What does shame have to do with this whole topic? And that led to a whole nother set of realizations that I didn't even know was there. So know that, yes, process for me was important. Some structure was important. And it was also about sitting down and writing and just seeing what came forth. And I learned and I gained further realizations from doing the writing, which is part of the reason I love writing. Is it is a process for me. Like, I would have written this book even if no one ever reads it, it would have been worthwhile for me to write this book just for myself. And of course, I hope many people read it and get what they need from it. And it's already been worth it because I got to heal further and sort things out further for myself and experience a deeper kind of freedom just from writing the book. I got more grounded and wild by writing Grounded Wildness. So that's all that background, process and magic. It's a combination of both. I think I pretty much approach my entire life that way. If anything, I could lean more into the magic. I think that's something that I'm consistently releasing some of the process and leaning more into the magic side of things. So, book process, phase number 1 of the book writing process was collecting ideas. And this phase lasted for approximately a year and a half. So this was a long phase. This was the longest phase out of any one, was just collecting ideas. I started an Evernote that just said like book number 2 or ideas. I don't even remember because I didn't even know if this was a book at the beginning. And then I just started plopping ideas into there. Anything that would come up for me that felt resonant, that felt important, a question that I had, a story, an idea, really anything. I would plop it into that Evernote app and then just started collecting things. And I will tell you, I started writing down these notes before An Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules was even published. So after it was finished writing, but before it even came out, I already knew there was a deeper something going on here, but I really didn't know what it was. So those notes were really slow at first. Just every once in a while, I'd plop into that Evernote app and capture it. No judgment, no nothing about what was going on, just capture it. And that's it. Things started to speed up during the summer of 2021, partly because I'd gone through some really deep personal realizations that you will read about in the book, some pretty vulnerable things that happened and things that are going on, but they were hard things, but led to this deeper freedom that I experience now and really led me into grounded wildness, this feeling of living in grounded wildness. And so the notes really sped up during that time. I was doing this deep personal exploration. I'd had some hard things happen. I had those realizations. And that summer, I've talked about this a little bit in other podcast episodes in my emails, I had a work less summer. I was pretty burned out and I needed to work less. So I gave myself a whole lot of permission to sit on my patio, and I hiked every Friday. And what's interesting about that is, yes, I was officially working less, but I got so much work done for this book that I don't even really think it was working less. It was just working totally differently because I needed that space for the ideas of this book to come forward and for them to really gel together. I wouldn't have been able to do that had I been pushing hard and going, because this book needed to rise up from my soul. It needed to come together and it needed space to do that. So that was phase 1. And like I said, that phase lasted for about a year and a half. And I wondered at some point, how am I going to know when I'm done with that phase? How am I going to know? Is there going to be some signal from the universe that I have enough notes and now it is time to start writing? I don't know how this works for other people, and I don't honestly remember how it worked for my first book, but for this one, it was around Thanksgiving time, and I was out on a hiking trail, and suddenly I knew it's time to start writing. And yes, other ideas will come up as I write, but I don't need to collect any further notes. It is time to start writing. And so about a month later, on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, I entered into phase 2 of the writing process, which was the shortest phase, but a pretty intense one and really important, which was organization. So I mentioned that I had 45,000 words of notes in my Evernote app. They were all in just bullet points. Some were organized, some were really long bullet points with like a whole story, some were short bullet points. And I printed them all out. Also, I'm realizing as I say that, I forgot a step in here as well. I went into the notes collection / organization, was that I reread all of my journals from the last several years. When I wrote an Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules, I went back all the way to my first journal from second grade and read 30 years worth of journals coming up to that book. I didn't do all 30 years for this one, but I did read probably 5 years worth of journals. And it was so helpful because I got to remember what I truly felt like in those moments. And I got to see these glimpses of grounded wildness that had been coming up for years, like those feelings that were there. And I didn't even know what they were at the time. I couldn't have put a name to it, but the rumblings were there. And also the raw emotions of the really hard parts. And for me, this was helpful because I think, when we go through something hard, sometimes later we can gloss over it or we can overemphasize it or just not be super accurate. And because I had all of these journal notes from in the hard things, I could put those into the book. You'll see some quotes from my journal in the book, but more often it's just a capturing of the essence of what was in there, a story or a feeling that I had. So that went into this as well. And then the organization. So I printed out everything, all 45,000 words, all in bullet points. I cut out like physically with a scissors. This is the very low tech way of writing a book. I cut out with a scissors every single bullet point, cleared off my kitchen table, and started to organize. This was New Year's Eve, 2021 and New Year's Day, 2022. I took like hours, both of those days, and just laid everything out on my kitchen table and started to group things together. I had kind of an idea of the overall structure of the book, but I wasn't quite sure. So I started to group things together into categories and into chapters. And after that, once I had these categories, then came in the part that I learned in 9th grade study skills that I have used for every single paper in high school, in college, in grad school, and writing both of these books. So thank you very much, Mrs. McRoberts, for teaching us this structure. Is that I got note cards, like 3.5 by 5 note cards, put a recommended or not recommended, but like estimated chapter title, possible chapter title, conglomerated those with the notes. But then in addition to that, I wrote down like, what's the message of this chapter? What's the purpose of this chapter? What are the key stories that I'm going to share here? How do I want people to feel reading this chapter? And then I had all of those notes together. So every single chapter had some note cards and it had all of these printed out bullet points from Evernote. So this was the organization. And it really did only take about 2 days of this very physical organization of, I don't know where I ate for those 2 days because it was not at my table because those notes were all over the place. And then went into phase 3. And I want to point out here, I'm about to swear a couple of times. So if you are in a car with children or anything like that, just, turn it down or tell them to mute their ears, put on those earmuffs. Phase 3 was my shitty first draft. And I did not come up with this title, this shitty first draft title. This comes from Anne Lamont, who is a writer and an amazing human. I don't know her personally, but she seems like a pretty amazing human. And the first chapter of her book, Bird by Bird, which is all about writing, is called Shitty First Drafts. And thank God I read this chapter at least a couple of years before writing an Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules, because this chapter just gives you full permission to be terrible, like to write a shitty first draft, to do it poorly just to get it on the page. Because within that, you're going to get some really bad things and you're also going to get some magic. And also by giving yourself permission to write that shitty first draft, then you aren't held back by perfectionism and editing and feeling like it has to be right and good or even like mediocre. You're just getting it on the table. So it becomes a lot easier to write, a lot faster, a lot more efficient to write the shitty first draft. I will also tell you, so I said I outlined the book New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. Over the next 3 months, all I wrote was the introduction and chapter 1. And that was it. And this was mostly because I was truly busy, but then I had a little come to Jesus talk with myself because I was like, Heather, at this rate, you're going to finish the book by 2030. And that was clearly not what I wanted to do. So then after that, starting in late March, I really dedicated myself to writing this book and obviously getting my other work done as well. But beyond the current work I had to get done to serve my clients, to show up for speaking engagements and coaching engagements and, the stuff that was really important, this book was the next priority. It was the big thing I was working on. So it always took priority over the other optional things after that point. And after that point, I wrote the whole rest of that shitty first draft in about 3 months. I will also tell you, I got COVID during this time, which actually really helped because I had a very mild case of COVID. And I wrote 3 chapters in those 10 days of isolation. So that was really helpful. I sat on my porch and wrote because I was going stir crazy in my house, being an extrovert who needed to isolate for a super long time. The funny thing about how I wrote this as well is, or where I wrote it, more I should say, is I wrote in coffee shops, I wrote in the library, I wrote at my kitchen table, I wrote a lot on my patio, both the editing and the writing, pretty much everywhere, except for the desk that I'm sitting at right now. I don't think any writing actually occurred at this desk. It just didn't feel like the right place to do it. And I think part of that is because, or the main reason really, is because this is where I do all my other work. This is where I do my speaking engagements. This is where I record this podcast. And I love all that work. That's all good. But that's what happens here. The writing needed to happen in another place. It needed to happen in a place where I wasn't doing my speaking and writing emails and kind of the normal stuff. It needed to be in a place that, my brain went to a different situation where I wasn't in work mode. I was in creativity mode and let it flow mode. So that shitty first draft was written pretty much everywhere except for my actual desk. I will also tell you that particularly in writing this first draft, and this was even more true in an Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules, a lot of emotions came up. I cried during writing the first draft. I also felt a lot of joy. There were parts of it that I was like, wow, this is powerful. And there were parts that I was like, I got to work on this. I don't know what's going on here. And it's interesting because people always tell me, people frequently will tell me that they cried during reading an Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules. And I'm always like, yeah, that doesn't surprise me because I cried while writing it. It's real, the emotions in the book. It's not a sad book. Neither of the books are sad, but they're just real. They're real. And I think for me, when I hit on something real, tears are what comes forward. And those tears aren't, sometimes they're from sadness, but oftentimes they're just more from truth, hitting that deep truth and that deep realization. And there's power in that. And for me, that brings tears forward, those deep truths. Because I realized some of those deep truths, or I was writing about some of those deep truths as well as some hard situations, emotions came up for me as writing the book as well. So that was phase 2, the shitty first draft. Now is phase 3, editing. After writing the shitty first draft, I went through and I printed out my entire shitty first draft, read through the whole thing, really for big picture edits. Does this book fit together in the way a book should fit together? Does the overall flow make sense? Are there any big things that are missing? Are there whole chapters or concepts that are missing? Or are there things in here, big things in here that just don't belong? I like them, but they maybe don't belong. And I really looked at this from a big picture perspective. And then I started editing. And when I say my second draft of editing, this is what I do. I printed out the entire book and I had notes written in it, but then I started writing, actually typing, starting from square one. So I'm not starting from square one because I have the words next to me, but I'm not just going back into the first draft and editing. I'm literally starting typing and writing from word one of the introduction. Because for me, that helps me to edit when I'm actually rewriting it fully in the second draft, not just editing individual words. And then came the third draft, which was the more detailed draft. That was like sentence structure and paragraphs and getting really critical about like, do I really need that story, or can that story be cut out? And I just basically continue to cut and cut and cut. The book is about 50,000 words, which is definitely as long as it needs to be. I don't want to make anything longer than it has to be. I just want to give you the goods and only the goods. And I think I seem to be a pretty compassionately critical editor with myself. Like, I don't get overly attached to like, oh, but I really like that story and I want to keep it in. I'm like, is that story serving the message of this book? Is it necessary for the message of this chapter? Is it necessary for the emotional connection with you? And if the answer is no, that story is going. Even if I like it, even if there is a point to it, but it doesn't feel absolutely critical, it's out. So I don't get overly attached. And I will also say, when I say I'm compassionately critical, there's equally parts of like, that needs to go, or that's terrible and I need to work on it. And also like, wow, that part's really good. Like, I don't need to touch that at all. That part is really good. And I can hold both of these within my writing really easily. It's different than almost any other thing I do. And I can't quite figure out why for me, but there's this like empathy and objectiveness, but not judgment. It's just like, yep, that needs to go. Yep, that needs to improve. Wow, that doesn't, because that's really good. And I can look at them both equally. And I don't know why this is so much easier in my writing than it is in other places, but I will tell you, perfectionism and self-judgment, the inner critic, hardly ever come up during my writing. And this is unique. I would like downright weird. This is not what most writers would say. Most writers, a lot of writers would say like, there's so much inner critic, there's so much perfectionism when it comes to writing. And you all know I have that in other parts of my life, and I've worked to release that. And I just don't really feel it in writing. I feel a lot of vulnerability, but that is a different category. I haven't felt this like, oh, but it has to be perfect. It has to be exactly the right way. I don't know. It's just not there as much. There's a little bit of perfectionism that ties in with the vulnerability before it gets sent out, but it's different. And I can't quite put my hand on why. The thing I want to point out at this point, I'd been working on the book for almost a year. Well, notes for a year and a half, and then writing it for a year. All three drafts. So the shitty first draft, the big picture second draft, and the detailed third draft. And no one had read a single word. No one. I hadn't shared it with anyone. I'd verbally shared some of the concepts, but not any of my actual writing. And that is on purpose for me. This is not the way that this works for other people, but for me, I needed to be really clear on what this book was before I shared it with anyone, because I wanted it to be strong in my soul. I wanted to essentially be grounded and wild with this book before sharing it with anyone, because I knew once I was solid in myself, then I would be open to feedback. Then I would be able to parse through the feedback that I was about to get and say, okay, that's really good feedback. I need to take that into account. And, oh, that's just that person's opinion. And they can have that opinion, but it doesn't actually align with what I want in this book. So I was essentially less susceptible to other people's just opinions on the book, as opposed to, and I was able to sift through and get really clear on like, yeah, that's really good feedback. I need to take that in. So once I was solid in myself, then I knew I could be open, and I knew I could hear anything anyone had to say, whether it was really great feedback, really critical feedback, important feedback I could take out and throw out the window, all of it. I needed to be secure with myself before I could do that. So that meant I worked on this book for 2.5 years without anyone reading a single word. And then they did. So phase 4 was feedback. I sent the book to both my publisher at Wise Inc. So I work with Wise Inc. Creative Publishing based in Minneapolis, an awesome company. So they are a hybrid publisher, meaning I own my book. It is legally self-published, but they guide me through the entire process. So the book is just as high quality as if it had been published through a traditional publisher, but I own it and I have the final say and control over everything, which is what I wanted. And I worked with them for my first book as well, and they're fantastic. So I sent the book to my publisher, and then to 4 beta readers who I know. And those beta readers, really, they read the entire book, and then they both shared what they thought was powerful about it. But they also underlined, like, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. This is confusing, or I think this could be improved, or this seems like it's similar to this other part of the book, or just all of those questions, kind of those big picture questions. And it was so helpful because, like I said, no one had read the book. So then I'm getting these external perspectives on it. It was also scary to send it out because I didn't know what people's reactions were going to be. And I was asking for critical feedback. So I knew it wasn't going to be all joyous and happy and rainbows and unicorns. But overall, the feedback was exactly what I needed. Their feedback from these beta readers and my publisher helped make the book a million times better. And the overall concepts of the book, they all resonated with on a deep level. So like I knew the book was hitting on something important and personal and that connected with people and will connect with you as well. And they gave me feedback that was really helpful. So then I incorporated that feedback. And then we went into phase 5, which is essentially where I'm at now, or where I've been for the last couple of months, which is publishing. And Wise Inc. has guided me through this entire process, which is like the end of editing and then moving into publishing. And the end of editing has looked like getting a copy editor who can tell me if my grammar is correct, or where I need to add a comma or take away a comma or change a sentence structure, or make sure my subject and verb agreement is similar throughout an entire paragraph. And like, thank God there are people who do this, because my grammar is solid, but it is not at the level of what you need to have it be in a book. And there's no way I didn't want to have to think about that as I was writing the book. Like, I'm good at writing. This is not my skill. This is someone else's skill. So I am so grateful that there are copy editors out there who love to do this and are good at it, because it's not me. So that copy editor got the book, and then I got back all the changes and I went through them one by one by one. And most of them I accepted, and a few were more of suggestions. So then I got to decide, do I want to accept that? Do I want to make that change, or do I really want to keep it the way that it is? And that's one of the reasons I like self-publishing, is I get to make those final decisions, which is really fun. So copy editing going on, cover design next week. In my email list, you will see the cover. I'm going to reveal the cover. So if you are not on my email list, go to a link in the show notes and get on my email list so you get that cover reveal happening next week. And if you're listening to this after May 2nd, you can also go to my website, heatherwhelpley.com, and you'll see a tab there for the book for Grounded Wildness, and the cover will be on there as well. And I will tell you, this cover, I'm really excited about it. I had no idea what to expect, and it is just beautiful. I got to choose from a whole bunch of them, and then we got to do more detailed design. So again, not my skill set, but the book cover designer was amazing at this, and she was just fantastic. And I'm so excited. I feel like the cover really conveys grounded wildness. It's like masculine and feminine, and there's natural elements in it, and it's bright and it's bold, but not forceful. Like, it is all the things that grounded wildness is, because grounded wildness, living in grounded wildness, is bold, but not forceful. It's confident and relaxed at the same time. And I feel like that's what's leaping off of this cover, is the feeling of grounded wildness. So, and I will say that is the one part of this whole process I did get a little perfectionistic about. I was like, can we tweak that font just like a little bit more? And I'm actually totally happy that I did, because I'm now so excited. I feel like this is the exact way that the cover is supposed to look, and it's awesome. Now where we're at is interior designs and fonts and all of those details. I also got endorsements. So like whenever you see the inside of a book that says advanced praise for, I don't know how traditional publishers do this, but for me, I literally just reached out to both other authors and speakers I knew and people that I'd worked with inside corporations and for speaking engagements and said, hey, could you do me a favor? Could you read this book and provide an endorsement? Which I will tell you, probably felt even more vulnerable. So again, at this point, when I sent out these endorsements, still only like 5 or 6 people had ever read the book. So it felt really vulnerable to ask these people both the ask for the endorsement, because I was, requesting their time to read this book. And then I wasn't sure how people would react, because it's not a corporate book. There are absolutely huge concepts in this that can be applied to work. And I talk a lot about work in it, and particularly about showing up as your full authentic self and the barriers that get in the way of that in our lives as a whole, because of these rules that are placed on us as women and other groups of people as well. And it's a really personal book, and I wasn't sure how people would respond. And it gave me a lot of confidence, first, that people just said yes. Almost everyone said yes. A few people were too busy, but almost everyone said yes. And then when I got the book back after they'd read it, it was a reinforcement of why I wrote this book in the first place. The feedback and the endorsements and the comments that they had, they really touched me. I remember one person wrote back and asked for more time to read the book after the deadline that I'd given her for that endorsement, because she said, you said I could skim this book to provide the endorsement, which I did. I told people they could skim the book. She's like, I can't skim this book. It's too powerful. I need to read every word. I'm pretty sure I cried. I'm almost crying now when I think about that, because her saying that touched something really deep in me. And knowing that there's the truth that I attempted to convey in this book is being seen by others, and it's allowing them to see their own truth, which is the whole thing I wanted in this book, is for you to see your own truth. So now we're at that phase of those final details, final edits, proofreading, and then it'll go to the printer. And where we're at right now in this moment is 1 week before the presale. If you're listening to this in May, or if you're listening to it later, the book is still going to be available for presale later, and then actual sale, of course. So no matter when you're listening to this, as long as it's after May 2nd, the book will be available for some sort of sale and purchase, and you can learn more about it. But what's really cool about the presale, just during the month of May, is you are going to get extra things if you buy during that month. So there's 2 fun things that are just for you. One is you will get the book before anyone else. Like anyone who buys during the month of May during the presale, I'm going to ship those books out to you before even the actual launch date. So you will be like literally the first person to get this book, which is just kind of fun. I don't know. It's always fun to feel like you're like in on something new. So if you buy during May, you will be the first person to get this book. Second, for people who buy during the month of May, later on in the fall, after the book is out and you have a chance to read it, you are going to get invited to an exclusive virtual interview / Q&A with me. So you get to, I'll have someone interview me about the book, but then you'll also get to ask your questions about how it applies to you. If there was something you wanted to know a little bit more about in the book, whether it's about my story or your story or just anything, like it'll be a total open Q&A for you to answer those questions, or just come on and listen to other people's questions and answers. I think it's always interesting to hear what other people have to say and their questions are as well. And then there's the thing that I am personally most excited about, which is that 10% of every single book sale, so not like profit, not after anything, straight up 10% of every single book sale is going to go to the Women's Empowerment Conference, which is actually for high school girls in the Broomfield, Colorado area. Every year, the school puts on a Women's Empowerment Conference in the spring, And I spoke at it this year. And it's the students and the teachers who put this on. And it's not just for their high school, but girls and students from other area high schools as well. And several hundred people show up, and there's speakers from all over Colorado, just really amazing sessions on everything from women's health to empowerment to leadership to writing to creativity to diversity to racism. I mean, just everything you can think about. And these girls get to choose which sessions they are going to go to. And my main contact, so like I said, I was a speaker at this in March. My main contact was a high school senior. And I can tell you, she was every bit as organized as any meeting planner I've ever worked with. She was like on it. So when I say the students and the teachers run this conference, they really run this conference. I had no personal interaction with a teacher, with a legitimate adult, until the actual day of the conference. All of my interaction was with this high school senior, and she was awesome. And so 10% of the proceeds are going to go to supporting that conference during the entire month of May. So buy a book for yourself, buy it for your entire book club, buy books for your friends and family. These can be Christmas gifts next Christmas. I know that's a long ways away, but still you can be like a super early bird and just get it all done now, knowing that not only are you going to get some of those additional freebies, but you are contributing towards empowering girls and really setting free, grounded wildness. And I know a younger age than I wish I would have had some of these messages earlier in my life when I needed them. High school was about the time I started needing these messages. I needed these messages to stay in my grounded wildness, stay in that freedom that I experienced as a kid, and to grow with it instead of apart from it, which is, I know, what happened to me. So bulk pricing will also be available. If you want to buy over 50 copies of the book, reach out to me. My email is heather@whelpleyconsulting.com. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So there'll be bulk pricing available. Like if you want to do a book club in the future for your entire women's employee resource group, women's network at your company, reach out to me and we'll talk about that and get that situated as well. And this is all happening starting next week. So if you are not on my email list, make sure to go to the show notes to join my email list, because then you'll get all the details directly to your email. You'll get that cover reveal. You'll know everything that's going on. And then tune back in to the next podcast episode, because I'm going to read the introduction out loud. And I'm pretty excited about that. I want to give you that sneak peek as to what's actually in this book and what it's all about in that detailed way, so you can get the feel of what the book is truly about, what grounded wildness is, and what you might experience reading this book. So tune back in to the next podcast episode for that, and join my email list so that you get all the details, because it's time. It's time for us to get grounded and wild. It's time for us to create a grounded wildness community of women who are doing this together. So come join me, join us in getting grounded and wild once again. Bye.